Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nestle. So, what if you could communicate clearly in situations that might be, stressful, so that you could honestly and authentically answer tough questions on the spot? For example, after reading Think Faster, Talk Smarter, the best-selling book on impromptu speaking by Matt Abrahams, I was able to handle a Q&A session at a workshop a few weeks ago by applying better listening skills. And that's not all. Matt's book also gave me a killer pitch formula that I'm using to expand my role and grow my career. It's also, as you might have guessed by now, how I set up the opening of today's show. And the story is true. Matt's book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter, really helped me. It's a handy guide to getting out of your own way, gaining confidence, managing anxiety, and developing strategies for speaking when you're put on the spot. And my listeners will know how much I truly enjoy being put on the spot. So it's really a helpful book. But don't take my word for it. It's my immense honor to have with me today the man himself. He's a leading expert in strategic communication and public speaking, a consultant to CEOs and Nobel laureates. He's a professor at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. He's the host of Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. And yes, the author of Think Faster, Talk Smarter, How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot, Matt Abrahams. Matt, it's great to see you.
Great to be here with you. I'm really excited, and I love that you use the pitch structure I teach as the way to start. And in it, you shared about how listening helped you. So you get an A+ if you were in my class.
Well, I like to get a little meta and kind of dig in a little bit with my guests and understand, how what they've actually done, how it's contributed to me, and how I can then turn it around and help my guests benefit in some way. And, what you've done here with Think Faster, Talk Smarter, this incredible book, and I'm holding it up for Matt to see and see the little Post-its I've got sticking out there, which is always evidence that someone has read a book. I think when you're interviewing somebody and they don't have Post-its in the book, you got to be a little suspicious.
Well, it actually warms my heart. People, when you write a book, people often ask, how do you know if the book was successful? And I don't care if the book gets on lists or other things. I care that people actually read it. To me, success is if they're dog ears, Post-its, underlined, highlighted. That to me is the purpose. It's to help people. And if you're finding value in it and going to return back to it to give you that help, then I have been successful. So it actually warms my heart to see that you've got some Post-its and dog ears in there. It really helps.
I mean, well, not only is it helpful, Matt, it's just practical. I mean, I think it just speaks to people. And now speaking as a PR and comms person, I'm supposed to have messaging in my blood, right? I'm supposed to understand how to go out there and talk to people. But speaking on the spot is always hard. It's always hard. And I've shied away, almost my entire career, I've shied away when people say, well, you could be the spokesperson for this. I'm like, no, not me. I'm not the spokesperson. I'm the guy behind the spokesperson. I'm the guy who likes to write the talking points or can advise. But you know what? Last couple of years, coming out here on this show, doing my own thing, understanding a little bit more that actually, I probably can speak a little more out front. I'm getting much more comfortable with the role of being in front of people and talking. And a lot of that, is sort of organic, right? It just happens over time. You're put in these positions, you're put in these situations, and you don't realize that you've been skill building your whole life to get there.
Right.
But then along comes a book like this, and it's like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Oh, now I can put I could put a formula to what I'm doing. It's really excellent. And I think that for people who haven't had the benefit of 20 something years of being in marketing and PR, especially that, I mean, this book is for any level of your career, I think it's just a great place to start. And, it's a reflection of where you've been. And, I think that's where I want to actually start talking here today. I mean, I always talk too much on these things, but how about we start with the way I usually start, which is, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, Matt? Like, how did you get to this point of, I want to tell people, I want to help people to speak on the spot? It's a very unique niche place to be.
Well, it's a much needed place to be, I think. So if you think about it, most of our communication is in the moment. It's not the planned presentation or the pitch or the meeting with an agenda. It's really these in the moment situations, answering questions, giving feedback, introducing yourself, making small talk. And there's a personal story here, and then there's a professional story about my interests. So with my last name, Abrahams, A-B, I have been spontaneous speaking my entire life, all through school, from elementary school, even through graduate school. I always knew where I would sit, and I always knew that I would go first. I was a high school teacher for a few years. I am a teacher. I know sometimes we get lazy and we just put people alphabetically. So I, growing up, was always put on the spot. Whenever the teacher asked a question and they went around the room, they would start with me. So I developed an expectation around spontaneous speaking and to some degree a level of comfort with it, just because after doing it so much, you get a little comfortable. Fast forward many, many decades after elementary school, I was asked by the Stanford deans of the business school where I teach and have been there over 13 years now. They came to me with a problem and they said, our very bright business students, some of the best, brightest minds in business, young minds in the world are struggling answering teachers' cold calls. The professor would say, "What do you think?" And the students, even knowing the answer, would struggle to get that answer out. And they said, "Is there anything you could do to help them feel more comfortable and confident?" And that was my portal to exploring this whole idea. So I did a deep dive into research in psychology, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, improvisation, and acting. And as a result, created a methodology that now every Stanford MBA student within the first 3 weeks of their time on campus has the opportunity to go through this content. They come out of it feeling more comfortable and confident in their speaking in the moment. And the professors are saying, hey, we're getting better dialogue, better conversation. So this methodology was born out of a very specific need. And over the years, I took it out of the classroom and I've been using it in the teaching I do, the videos I produce, the podcast I do. And I have seen how others can benefit. So that was really the impetus for the book, is to bring this information to as many people as possible so we can actually all do better speaking in the moment.
It's really needed. I think I'm going to probably say this 100 times during our conversation about how necessary this is. I think it's even more so now that we are such a kind of, we're strewn about the universe as remote workers and in-person workers. And, you have different modes and different, let's say, theaters in which you have to communicate every day.
Yep.
It's always different, always changing. And I think it causes a lot of pain, for people who have been in corporate life their whole career, who've been in,
right.
And they're only coming to grips with it now, I think. And some folks are absolutely jumping in and saying, this is fantastic. Some people, I think, are having some, a little consternation about the whole thing. So I wanted to ask you about, those pain points that people are kind of having, and, what you're seeing. And I know you're dealing with students a lot, and especially MBA students. MBA students typically have some experience, some work experience behind them. You've counseled and consulted with people across industries and are very deep into what I like to call our profession, the communications profession, in many ways. So thinking about that, what your book points out 6 kind of, steps or strategies or overall topic areas that we can think about, the speaking on, when you're put on the spot. Can we go through some of those a little bit and just talk through the steps and, try to gear it a little bit towards like people who might be having trouble with this these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is divided into 2 sections. The first section is the methodology. I'm happy now to walk you through the 6 steps. And then the second part is all about very specific spontaneous speaking situations that we find ourselves in, like answering questions, giving feedback, small talk, pitching, as you gave an example when you started. So happy to talk about that later.
Yeah.
The 6-step methodology divides into 4 mindset or approach steps and then 2 messaging or framework steps. So in terms of where we start, the first thing we have to deal with is anxiety. Anxiety looms large in all communication, and it's part of being human. We get nervous when we speak in front of others, but there are things we can do to manage that anxiety. And in the very first step, in the first chapter, I talk about very specific, academically verified techniques we can use to begin to reduce our anxiety and build our confidence in speaking. The second step has us looking at our goal. Many of us, when we speak in spontaneous speaking situations, want to do it right. We want to be perfect. We want to answer the question with the right answer. We want to give the best feedback. We want to be the most interesting in small talk. And that pressure we put on ourselves to be perfect gets in the way of us actually getting it done. So I like to say strive for connection over perfection. When I put my focus on connecting and getting my ideas across to you, rather than am I saying it the right way, I do better. And it boils down to cognitive load. Your brain can only process so much at one time. And if I am focused on judging and evaluating everything I'm saying, I'm splitting that cognitive load and I have less to actually be present with you. So I'm not saying don't judge and evaluate. We need to, but turn the volume down. Put your attention on the other person. So that's step two.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Matt. Can I just interrupt there for a second? Sure. And I apologize because I know you've been through this. Like you've been on the tour. You're talking about these steps. These first two in particular, were screaming at me when I was reading the book. And this whole idea of cognitive load and connection versus over perfection. But people, especially in our world, where in the communications world, where we are. We have to produce Q&A and talking points, and they got to be right. They got to be right. They got to be right. And I think it mistakenly translates into, well, now when I talk in front of the CEO or I talk in front of somebody, I always have to be right and I always have to be on. So shifting that mindset is so hard, right? It's so hard to say, okay, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, or whatever way you want to call it. And and I think it's very, very directly connected to anxiety. It certainly drives anxiety, right? And I personally have had loads of anxiety issues during my career and during my time. And I was hoping that you could just dig into these two things at first, and then we can move on to the third one after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so certainly. So when it comes to managing anxiety, you are not alone. Most people, up to 85% of people, report being anxious in high stakes situations. And quite frankly, I think the other 15% are lying. When it comes to managing anxiety, we have to take a two-pronged approach. First, we have to manage symptoms. Those are the things that we physiologically experience. And then we also have to manage sources. Those are the things that initiate and exacerbate our anxiety. So when it comes to symptomatic relief, maybe it's you feel your heart beating faster, maybe you blush and perspire, maybe you get shaky. These are all normal and natural. Your body is responding to the communication situation as if it were a threat, and you invoke fight or flight when under threat. Single best thing anybody can do is to take a deep belly breath, the kind you would take if you've ever done yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong. It's a deep belly breath. And what it does is it calms down your autonomic nervous system. The key is to have your exhalation be twice as long as your inhalation. So the rule of lung, if you will, is to take a 3 count in and a 6 count out. And if you do that just 2 or 3 times, you'll see some benefit.
I'm doing it now.
If you're really shaky, that's adrenaline. Adrenaline's sole purpose is to move you from threat to safety. So doing some kind of purposeful movement that is one that's embracing can really help. So when you start, if you're physically in a room with people, step towards your audience. Or if you're virtual, when you begin speaking, lean in a little bit, gesture. This gives that adrenaline a place to go. Therefore, you'll stop shaking as much. Finally, if you're like me and you turn red and you perspire when you get nervous, that's your core body temperature going up. We need to reduce that. And by holding something cold in the palms of your hand, you actually cool yourself down. When you get nervous, your heart beats faster, your body tenses up, your blood pressure goes up because you're pushing more blood through tighter tubes. It's like you're exercising. So we need to cool ourselves down, and holding something cold can do that. So that's symptomatic relief. And there are many, many other techniques. The first book I wrote was called Speaking Up Without Freaking Out. It's 50 techniques based on academic research to help you reduce your anxiety and build your confidence. So you have to find the ones that work for you. Not every technique works for every person. The other side of the equation is sources. Mm-hmm. And I already started talking about one of the main sources, which is striving for perfection. So we have to remind ourselves, I am in service of my audience by thinking about the needs of the audience. That takes attention away from ourselves and away from trying to be perfect and puts it more on connection. And how do I make this meaningful for you? And when I do that, I nip that source in the bud and become less nervous about the speaking and more concerned about the connection. So that's how those first two steps connect together.
Oh, that makes sense. I did want to share with you that I did do my own anxiety management plan per your book.
Yeah.
And mine is called PITS, PITS, which is not.
Tell me what it stands for.
Not a brilliant
Hopefully not
title.
Sweating in your armpits.
No, positive intent, right? Inhale, exhale, right? So the breathing, right? So be positive first, then inhale, exhale, and then because of what you have just said, then think, take a pause and think mindfully. And then I used salivate, like take care of that physical symptom of dry mouth, because I always have that. So that's my initial kind of stab at an AMP. And I really love in the book how you lay a lot of these symptoms out. And also if you do especially if you get the audiobook, but I believe even if you purchase the book, there are additional resources on Matt's website that have these things all detailed out. We can get back there later, but it's amazing.
In the book, there's a simple QR code. You click on it and you go to this whole website that has additional stuff that I update pretty regularly. I love your anxiety management plan.
Thank you.
That's great. Mine is three simple things. I take a deep breath. I remind myself I'm in service of my audience, and I say tongue twisters before I start any communication to warm up my voice and get me present focused. So
I love tongue twisters. What's your favorite one?
You have to repeat it after me.
Go for it.
It's 3 phrases, takes 5 seconds. And if you say it wrong, you say a naughty word. So repeat after me. I slit a sheet.
I slit a sheet.
A sheet I slit.
A sheet I slit.
And on that slitted sheet I sit.
And on that slitted sheet I sit.
Very good. You didn't say the naughty word. You could see what it would be, though.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yes. I've always been a big fan of tongue twisters. And my favorite one.
They warm up your voice and they get you present oriented.
It is great. Perfect. I like the Betty Botter one. I
can't do that one.
Betty, it's easy for somebody from the East Coast who doesn't pronounce T's properly. So Betty Botter bought a bit of butter if she bought, that one is a lot of fun.
Because you can sort of slur those together.
You can slur them around and impress people at the same time. Sorry, so let's get back. I'm very always grateful for distractions, but that's against rule number 6 or number 6 in the methodologies, which is the F word of communication. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Let's get back to the third point. So we talked about reducing anxiety. We talked about connection over perfection. Next.
Yes. So the next step in the methodology has to do with reframing these situations not as threats, but as seeing them as opportunities. Many of us, when we are in the moment of having to respond spontaneously, we see them as threats. We see them as something that is harmful to us. So when somebody asks a question, we feel like we're under threat, where this is a test, I have to respond, versus seeing it as an opportunity to connect, to expand, to learn, to collaborate. Even in the situation where the questions are most challenging or the feedback feels like it is, the request for feedback is some kind of gauntlet you have to get through. Even in those moments, it's an opportunity to find commonality and to help. And if we can reframe these situations that way, it can benefit us. So when I have somebody who's really harsh and really challenging, I remind myself that they're coming from a place where they care about the topic to the same degree I do, or they have some passion for it. There's a place I can connect. Much better than dealing with somebody who's apathetic and doesn't care. So the third step is a whole slew of techniques to help you see these things as positive, connective, and collaborative. Step 4 is about listening. We have to listen intently so we know how to respond appropriately. Most of us listen just enough to get the gist of what somebody is saying, and then we go into our practicing, rehearsing, judging, evaluating. Instead of listening for the top line, we need to listen for the bottom line. And in listening for the bottom line, we listen in a more focused way, and we will pay attention to nuance, to the circumstance, to the situation, to people's nonverbal behavior. So when we listen better, we can respond better. So step 3 is about seeing it as opportunity. Step 4 is about listening.
Excellent. Step 3, when we think about, and these are all these are so interconnected as well. As you speak, I can hear it even more. It's funny because I listened to the book on audio and I read it at the same time,
cool.
because I find that to be a really good way of, getting it in there. And I got so enamored with your voice. So I'm listening to you speak now and I'm like, yes, okay, it's really becoming clearer and clearer to me. The idea of mindset is really kind of underpins so much of this, does it not? I mean, I've spoken about it on the show before. I've had people come and talk about mindset and leadership mindset and success mindset. And you mentioned the Carol Dweck book in your book as well. I've gotten feedback on occasion that says, well, it's just a simple mental exercise. I don't think so. I feel like mindset is a much harder thing to accomplish. And I was, I'm just curious, or, wondering if there are any, what you've done to keep that in front of mind, in front of center as you go through your day to day, even because I think it's something that has to underpin almost all of communication, is that mindset. It's that growth mindset, the seeing opportunities rather than problems, and seeing the future rather than the past. There's a lot there to unpack.
So mindset is critical to effective communication. And I believe to just being effective in life. And to me, I'm always thinking about what are the tactics and practices I can use to help myself and others. So let me share a few that help me as I try to be more open in my mindset. And I quote Carol Dweck and others who study this. I'm very fortunate on my podcast to have interviewed Aaliyah Crum, who does amazing work around mindset. And let me give you just a few. In the book, I actually give four different mindset hacks, if you will, or unlocks to help. I'll just give you a few of them. One is this notion of not yet. And this comes directly from Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. Growth mindset is all about when you when you don't perform as well as you wish, when things don't go the way you want, rather than saying, I'm a bad person, I'm not capable, you see and search out growth opportunities to improve in that. And one of the things she talks about is this not yet approach. So when something doesn't go the way you want it to, when you didn't achieve what you had hoped to achieve, simply say to yourself, not yet. It doesn't mean I can't. It doesn't mean I won't. It just means not yet, not now. And that's a very motivational place to be. Then you can begin thinking about, what do I need to accomplish in order to get to where I want to be? So not yet is really powerful. And when I have some kind of stumble or something doesn't go the way I want, I will say to myself, not yet. Another approach, which I think is really helpful, comes from the world of sport. And it was, I first heard of it through the famous college basketball coach, Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K, as he is referred to. He inculcated in his team, and it really has permeated all sports, this notion of next play. And next play simply means that when something doesn't go the way you want, immediately move to the next play, thinking about what's next rather than ruminating in the moment. If you're a basketball player and you miss a shot and you sit there going, oh, I've practiced that shot so many times, I can't believe I missed it, this is awful, you've missed the next play. The other team is already down the court, you're not there defending. Similarly, if you have an amazing shot and it's great, don't sit there congratulating yourself because, again, the team is down the court and you're not down there. When something goes wrong, the tendency for us is to ruminate, to try to dissect it and fix it in that moment. And that means you're not in the next moment where something is happening that you could add value. So we want to avoid rumination in the moment, but we certainly want to do reflection after the fact. Reflection is really critical to growth, to improving, to learning, but next play. So those are two of just several techniques for how you can adopt a more opportunistic mindset. Not yet, next play. Those will really help.
I am so into that whole next play idea. I often forget it as I go through my day to day. You get weighed down by the minutia or the big things, that are unavoidable. A lot of them are externalities. A lot of them are things that come up at work, things that just will happen all the time. And you dwell, dwell, and you get in your own head. And that, I think, is something I've heard from feedback every now and then. Dan, you're getting in your own head, right? You're too far into your own head. Let's step out. And it's something that I, in turn, try to see in other people who I might be managing, who I might be leading, or who I'm working with. Just say, you know what? Let's take a breath. Let's take a beat. Let's get out of our own head and let's see what's coming up next. I find it to be such a critical tactic almost, but it's not really a tactic. I think because it has to be built into your programming. You have to really practice it, get it in there, reprogram yourself. What do they call it? Thank goodness for neuroplasticity, so that you can kind of change your behaviors.
Absolutely. So we can learn new things and work on new ways of being. Sure. Yeah,
but that getting inside your head is such a big one, and I think people, if they pick up one thing from this, it's get out of your own way, and that is such a it's a mindset issue, for the most part, as far as I've seen. So you were saying that those are the points about mindset, and I wanted to go back to listening. So listening was the next point.
Yes,
and another one that I think gets such short shrift in a day-to-day world. How can we be better listeners? We've been hearing about this for years. You lay it out really nicely. How in connection with mindset, in connection with anxiety reduction, and if you're a better listener, the anxiety goes down. It's a surprise to everybody. Calm down, listen, your anxiety will go down. But what would you say are some of the things that you would recommend to reduce or to be a better listener?
Yeah. So first and foremost, just recognizing the importance of listening. Listening is really, really important, and we need to do it. We need to spend the time doing it. As I said, we listen for the top line, not the bottom line. When we listen well, we get more insight into what is needed. Imagine you and I come out of a meeting and you say, "Hey, Matt, how'd that go?" And I hear, "Oh, feedback. Well, we could have done this better. We should have done this. We shouldn't have done that." And I itemize all the things that went wrong and all the things we could have done better. Had I listened more deeply, I would have noticed that you asked that question while looking down. Your tone was quiet. You had actually come out the back door, not the front door. In that moment, you weren't looking for feedback. You were looking for support. And my itemization of all the things that went wrong only make you feel worse. And I may have ruined that moment and potentially negatively affected our future interactions because I didn't listen deeply. So in the book, I talk about a 3-step approach to help people listen better. And I borrow this from a colleague of mine at the business school. His name is Collins Dobbs. He teaches a crucial communication class, like high stakes communication. And he has this methodology that helps, and it works perfectly for listening. 3 things: pace, space, grace.
I love this.
We live in a world where everything is moving so fast, we have to slow down. You cannot listen intently and move quickly. You have to be slow. Slow down. Second, we have to not just address pace, but we also have to give ourselves space. Sometimes it's physical space. Get to a place where you can actually hear well. More importantly, it's mental space. Free up the bandwidth to be present in the moment. You will listen better if you're present. If you're distracted, if you're looking at a device, it is a problem. And then finally, grace. Grace is about giving yourself permission to do the pace and space, but it's also to give yourself permission to pay attention to not just the words, but how the words are said, where the words are said, and permission to listen to your intuition that comes up as a result of what people say. Because of our experience, when somebody says something, that might remind us of something or trigger something in us. And that's useful information as well. So pace, space, and grace, along with the techniques I recommend for practicing it in this particular chapter, will help you to be a better listener. And I talk about asking follow-up questions and paraphrasing and being okay taking silence for a moment to process. All of those things will help you be a better listener.
All that's, listening for what's unsaid was one of the things that jumped out at me as well. Just how do you kind of, just what, in fact, the example you shared, the hypothetical you shared of us coming out of a meeting room, right? Looking at hearing the words, how to go, and jumping immediately to feedback. What was unsaid was, I just had a bad time in there. I'm not feeling good about myself.
Right.
That has been a revelatory thing for me in the last several years. And I feel like the pace of technological change, and I feel like certainly the reliance on Zoom and these various communication mediums compress time and space in such a way that we forget about pacing and spacing, and certainly we don't have a lot of grace.
Right.
Every day we're on these, whether you're, especially if you're a remote worker or you're in a hybrid situation, your schedule is planned to the hour, to the minute, boom, 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 one after another. You don't have this kind of ability to say, hey, let's take a walk. That's a great example of space. Let's take a walk and let's talk about things. And I feel like this is something that we really need to pay closer attention to.
Absolutely. And I love this notion of walking. So at the business school at Stanford, there's research that says when you walk and talk, you actually connect better. You're out in nature, you're moving, you're more focused. So at the Stanford Business School, all of us who teach there, not all of us, many of us who teach there, do what we call TWALKs, walking and talking. So when you set up a meeting, it could be an in-person meeting, a virtual meeting, or a TWALK. And I have had some of the most enriching, great connective conversations while walking around the campus talking with my colleague. Now, I have to share with you, a few of my colleagues, I think I'm in okay shape. A few of these folks are in great shape, and I end up being out of breath because they're walking so fast and talking. But it's a great way to force yourself to connect, and you'll listen better.
I miss those days. I miss the times where you would do walking meetings,
Yeah.
Or even, and it's on the personal side, now that you mention it, it's those twice daily walks I do with my wife, with the dogs.
Yeah.
That are such an important way for us to connect and bond together. When we're in the house doing, I'm working, she's doing her own thing, got the kids to deal with.
Yeah.
But we're out there walking, put the phones in the back pocket, don't pay attention to those. And all you got is you guys, your partner and the dogs. You don't need dogs clearly if you want to go on a walk, but
right.
Now that you mention it, it really does make a lot of sense.
And since during the pandemic, my wife and I took to walking daily, and we have kept that tradition, and it's really connective. And we learned that we actually have a flow to our walk. So we start by checking in with each other, then we deal with sort of the blocking and tackling of being a couple and parents, and then we just enjoy nature and enjoy each other's company. And that rhythm is also very helpful to us.
And it's the only place that you can be where you're not going to be overheard by the kids.
That's true. I haven't found them following us yet.
I know it's a very tactically important thing to do. So those first four area are the mindset issues, right?
Yes.
And you said that there are two more, and I know there's two more because I've read the book that are more focused on structure and tactics. So what are the next two parts of the methodology? I like this breaking into twos, by the way. It's very good.
Everything you said is all that you just recapped is all about mindset. That's how you approach these situations. Once we have that approach, we then actually have to say something. I mean, it's spontaneous communication. So we have to either write or speak. And the second two steps are first structure, have a framework. And then the second is the focus. So step 6 is about focus, as we alluded to. So I believe very firmly that messages need to be structured well, packaged in a way that helps the listener and receiver understand it. Our brains, neuroscientists tell us, are not wired or designed for lists of itemizations of information. Our brains are actually designed for story. In fact, long-term memory is called episodic memory, episodes. So to me, a story or structure is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas, a beginning, a middle, and an end. The one we are all familiar with. If you've ever watched a television advertisement or pitched an idea, you have used problem, solution, benefit. Here's a problem, a challenge, an issue. Here's how we solve it. And here's the benefit to you of having done so. Problem, solution, benefit. This is a very common structure. Like I said, we see it in advertising all the time. And it's very useful in that it helps us to know where to start, know where to end. For me, as the communicator, it helps me prioritize what I say. For you, as the listener, it helps package it up in a nice way. So we must structure our content. And there are myriad structures. In the book, the second part of the book, I have 6 spontaneous speaking situations. And with each, I assign or give at least one structure. Not to say that this is the only way to communicate, but it is a way. And when you're in that moment, like, oh my goodness, how do I respond to this feedback request? You have something you can invoke to help you. In many ways, it's like a recipe. You can be a better cook if you follow a recipe. Having a recipe gives you a place to start. You have freedom to move beyond the recipe, to change things in the recipe, but it gives you a place to start. So my goal is not to have everybody speak and answer questions the same way or give feedback the same way. It's to give people a tool to help them start so they can then respond better in the moment. So the second part is about the first part of the second set of the methodology. Step 5 is about structure. Step 6 is about focus. How do you be concise? My mother has this saying that I think captures this well. Tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us are clock builders, either because we are discovering what we want to say as we're saying it, or we want to demonstrate the depth of our thought and experience. Most people just want to know the time. In the military, they say bottom line up front. Just give us the time. And if we want to know how the clock was built, we will ask you. So structure and concision are what are critical to actually delivering good in the moment communication.
It's no lie that I have trouble with concision.
And you said that very concisely.
Yes, I was thinking about it. I do some clock building on occasion, yes. And I am, some of it is just pure curiosity. I'm working out where I want to go, and because I know there's a there, and I'm trying to find it. And the exploration is somewhat fun for me, but it might not be very fun for my listeners and for people that I'm talking with. And that's part of like focusing on the audience and understanding what they're looking for. I also really enjoy the idea of the recipe. One thing you said in the book is that when you are, when you have a structure, it's not really for you, it's for the audience as well. Yeah. The audience, people are wired, you said, to they're programmed to understand or listen to story. And putting everything in the framework of a story or of a clear beginning, middle, end, not a list. And the to-do lists are great, but right, you say that in the book too. But to have a actual structure where there's a beginning and a starting point and a destination helps everyone to understand what you're trying to say. And that is what a communication is all about, right? It's if you don't convey the message, you fail. And I really love that about the structures.
That's right. And thank you for summarizing that very eloquently.
Oh,
better than I think I did in the book. So thank you.
That's okay. Well, it is part of, to be fair, it is something that I do every day, but also I have a deep interest in storytelling and in some of the methodologies that are out there. And I spent a lot of time, working with a gentleman named Park Howell. I don't know if you ever come across Park. He has a great podcast called The Business of Story. And he is a proponent of the ABT framework, ABT method, but therefore very simple. Right. So that's a classic, hero's journey story. And you have your setup, you have your conflict, and you have your resolution. And I think, that fits in. It's problem, solution, benefit in a different way. It's compare, contrast, conclusion in a different way. So I'm a big fan of frameworks, anything that can help me get the message across.
They give you a jump start. They make your life easier, right? When you speak, period, you have to think about what to say and how to say it. The structure tells you or gives you an idea of how to say it. So now I have less effort. I just have to think about what to put in the structure.
Yeah.
When I teach this to my students, I will do something not to show off, but I'll ask my students to give me a topic. and they will give me a random topic. And within 5 seconds, I will give a 5-minute presentation based on whatever topic they throw out. And they're like, wow, how did you do that? And I said, I cheated. I used a structure. All I do is take your topic, think about what's the best structure, and then I just talk about it. And it makes it easier. Now, I'm not saying everybody can do that or should do that, but there is a multiplier effect, a catalyst effect when you have a structure, because it takes the pressure off. You know how you will say it. It's like a map. I know where I'm going. Now, I don't necessarily know every turn I'm going to take, but I know where I'm going to end up, and I know the general direction I'm going. And that's so helpful.
I love that. And I always forget it. You're in the pressure situation. And this is part of that taking a breath and pausing and thinking. Because if in that first breath and that first pause, you can think through what that model needs to be. And, Dr. Heal Thyself is sometimes what I get accused of. But when the pressure is on, actually, I have a problem with deference. So I'll just be right out there where if I'm talking to somebody who is senior to me or much more accomplished than I am, I get in my head and it's imposter syndrome. Maybe it used to be that a little bit. I'm getting better at that, but it's more like I grew up my professional life. The first 15 years of my professional life was in Japan, where hierarchy is really important. And when a CEO or somebody who's my boss says to me, hey, get me the answers to XYZ, I am very deferential. Mm-hmm. So that affects my anxiety as well. But here in modern culture, here in the Americas, that's not the way it is. Like it's a much flatter expectation, and when you're overly deferential, you don't necessarily convey the kind of trust or friendliness or openness that, some of the executives are looking for. So that's where the framework does get to be very helpful, because I don't have to worry about deference. I don't have to worry about social position. I just have to worry about giving a good answer. And it's very comforting, to understand that. I love it.
Absolutely. That level of awareness is something I strive to have all of my students feel comfortable with. That's great.
It is such a benefit to understand that. And, sometimes you have to wait till the question is asked, right? Or what the situation is. You were talking about just how you give your students give you a topic. That reminds me of my time in Toastmasters. You do the table topics.
Yeah.
Not to brag, but you are looking at the Tokyo region. I forget the number of the region, but Tokyo region, something or other, table topics champion of, I think it was 2002 or 3 or 4, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It was a long time ago. I was in a Toastmasters club through Gartner. I wasn't working for Gartner. It was just in my neighborhood where I lived. Yeah. And I did table topics. I love table topics.
English or in Japanese?
In English. Okay. Yeah, it was an English club, which gave me an unfair advantage in the semifinals, I will admit. But I did really enjoy table topics, and sometimes when I'm faced with a question that I don't know how to answer immediately, I have to go back to what worked in the table topics time, and it's very helpful. And because we approach things with the expectation, or we have this expectation, going back to the second part of the methodology, that we have to be perfect.
Right.
And table topics is a great example of how you don't need to be perfect. You just have to get a story that makes sense and that either informs, entertains, or gets your point across in a succinct manner. And that is enough to really move the ball, keep the ball moving forward, I think, is the thing. Like you'll get follow-on questions if you don't quite get it right the first way, but at least you're not going to turn off your audience or kill the subject. You'll be able to keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. And I love that you are a big proponent of and beneficiary of Toastmasters. I'm a former Toastmaster myself. I think it's a great organization. I recently spoke at their international convention. I think Toastmasters is a great avenue to build communication skills, leadership skills, and especially spontaneous speaking skills.
It's amazing. I don't know where I would. You look back at the experience in your life and you think, how did I get to where I am, or what were the choices that I made? And you inevitably go through to sort of counter against the idea of not dwelling on in the past. Sometimes you do dwell and you think about the choices you made. Toastmasters, great choice. Great choice. It's one of those great things I think that helped me today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've gone through these 6, the methodology, and everybody you need to read this book to get the details of all these things for sure. The second part of the book is practical applications. And I focused in on the pitch mostly and on some of the small talk points. But I also really, really enjoyed just the way that you lay out your examples. So are there any, like, if you think about the communications world and the marketing world, that pitch is one of the things I think that people like. How do you influence somebody to get your either to sell your product or influence someone internally, in a meeting, in a contentious, battle over territory or presenting a new idea. So there's, when you're in a space that's constantly changing and you are justifying your survival because of a budget or because of a new, because of competition, staying on top of that with great on the spot speaking skills, I think puts you in such a terrific advantage, puts you in such an advantageous position and helps you really earn the confidence and contribute value to your organization. Of the 6 practical applications, what do you think communicators and marketers should be really focused on from your perspective, Matt?
Well, so let me share. I'll share the specific. Well, I think actually all of them, the 6 that I have mentioned in the book apply to people who are marketing, PR, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So, you're answering questions, you're giving feedback, you're introducing yourself, you're making toasts, you're making small talk, you're certainly pitching. So I think all of them apply. The key across all of it, if you said, what's the one bit of advice that I would give to people in your profession and the profession I train people to be in, communication, it is know your audience. Yeah. Know your audience. Be focused on their needs. Take the time to do the reconnaissance, reflection, and research on the people you're communicating to. Even if it's spontaneous, you're going into a situation where you're on a panel or a cocktail party. Think about who's going to be there, what's important to them. In the podcast I do, Think Fast, Talk Smart, we have over 100 plus episodes. The number one most frequent bit of advice given by communication experts from all over the place is know your audience. They say it in different ways. It's about you. It's about them. It's not about you. Be audience-centric. My favorite recent one is, what is the listening you are speaking into? Ooh. All of these are different, unique ways of saying we have to be focused on our audience. So I think the different methodologies and the different examples I give are certainly relevant. I want to articulate the one you used at the beginning, if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
But otherwise, really it boils down to know your audience.
Yeah.
When it comes to pitching, I have a structure that I developed out of necessity that I think helps people very quickly and concisely put forth an idea, a product, a service, yourself, if you're pitching yourself, in its 4-sentence starters. And you used it beautifully when you started our conversation today. The 4 starters are, what if you could, so that, for example, and that's not all. What if you could, so that, for example, and that's not all. And if you dissect these, you can see that they're doing very specific things. What if you could is a hook, gets you involved, gets you thinking about potential benefits. So that is your relevance. It's solving a problem. It's capturing an opportunity. For example, makes it real and concrete. We remember concrete detail better than high-level information. And then finally, the and that's not all shows that this has legs. This is bigger than just what you're talking about. So I'd love to do something with you right now, just to show people how this can work spontaneously. I'm going to put you on the spot and I'm going to ask you to give me a product, a service, a something, and I'm going to pitch it in this structure. And for everybody listening, this is not planned. Whatever I'm presented with, I did not know I was getting. What might you say?
Okay. I know that you have this big improv background, and I'm trying to find something interesting. And I'm just going to look around my room, and I'm going to say, whiteboards.
What if you could capture in the moment your best, most creative ideas so that you and your team could further elaborate and execute on them. For example, imagine your next strategic planning meeting where you want to make sure you're identifying your mission, vision, values, and the steps you will take to achieve it. And that's not all. You can use this whiteboard device to not just capture ideas, but also as a fun tool to connect people through having different people draw and capture information simultaneously. I didn't know you were going to ask me to do that. I didn't know I'd ever have to pitch a whiteboard, but through that structure, it was able to get me through it. I don't know how long I took to think about my response, but
like
it wasn't
3 seconds.
very long. And then you can assess if it was a compelling pitch or not. But do you see how it gave me a place to start?
I did, and it reminds me of the game that you play in the book where people have to go around and give the wrong names to things.
Yes.
And I, as soon as I said whiteboard, I was like, I should have thought of something better, because that's what we do. We strive for, we don't think our answers are the right ones or the good ones. But then I realized as you were speaking, it doesn't matter. The point is that you were able to take some random topic and deliver through a framework a killer pitch. And of course, if we're talking about software, or we're talking about energy, or we're talking about like in my business, water, toilets and showers and faucets, different. The pitch will be different, but the fundamental structure works. And I love structuring the beginning of the show about it because it felt a little bit more, I guess abstract, because it's a podcast or a book, or so I tried to figure out the best way to introduce the topic. And I know there's 1,000 ways to do it, but I hope that our listeners really understand how useful and how immediately applicable these frameworks are. It's amazing. Sometimes just distilling things down to the simplest things. Our industry loves that, but it's really good to see it in action.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. These structures really do help. They really do help. And there's no magic. Yeah.
Now, Matt, we're running up on time here. I know that, you've been, to say you've been busy is an understatement.
I have been busy. That's true.
It's not like you have a grad student to teach or a book to promote
or a podcast
to run and all these things. I did want to get your thoughts on one thing that is really on my mind, and certainly is probably on a lot of people's minds. That's tangential to the book, and that is: do you think the impromptu speaking skill, right, the skill of speaking on the spot, is in decline or is endangered by the advent of AI? And I'm saying this because AI is a huge part of what I'm doing these days, especially generative AI. And I know a lot of people are focused on it. So, what has it affected your thinking on any of this, or the way that you teach it, or, do you have a vision of the future? Anything really. It's an open question.
I am truly agnostic on this. I don't know. I am an optimist in general. So I do think AI is going to have a big impact on communication and on the world. I don't think that's a very unique position. How it will impact is interesting to me. So very early on, when ChatGPT first came out, my podcast team, we were thinking we've got to do something. It's going to impact communication. What should we do? And I actually interviewed it. Now, today, that doesn't sound that interesting or unique, but this is several months ago. We actually typed in responses, got feedback, got its output, and then put it through a text-to-voice translator. So we actually had a conversation. Now that's a feature of the tool, but back then it wasn't. And the tool itself provided some interesting insight. We asked, how are you going to impact communication? And it said that it will make many things easier, but it will never replace human-to-human communication. Right. There is a connection that happens between people that a tool like generative AI cannot capture. And I believe that to be true.
Yeah.
Now, I personally am using generative AI in a few ways. So I encourage my students, and I encourage anybody listening into your podcast who wants to get better at spontaneous speaking, to type in prompts that then return to you tests or challenges that you can use to practice. So if
Oh,
you're
it's a great
doing
idea.
a job interview at a certain company, say, give me 5 questions for this role at this company, and it'll spit out reasonable questions. As soon as you see one, practice answering. Great tool, great way to practice spontaneity. Similarly, for my non-native English speakers, I recommend that they use the tool to help them see other ways of saying things that they write. Not to say it's the right way, but to give them other options. And I, as a teacher, I believe a lot of the way we learn is by seeing practical, tactical examples. I create many examples in my class. I have used generative AI to create more examples. I think more is better often when it comes to examples like I teach. And so I used to have 3, now I have 8. ChatGPT helped me create some of those. So I think there's a lot of potential for it, but I do have a lot of concern around veracity, how accurate is the information, around the ability to actually think through tough arguments and ideas rather than just typing in and seeing what comes back. So I'm agnostic but optimistic.
Yeah. I'm in much the same boat, and I wrote down your use case because it's, I sometimes forget how you can use. First of all, I'm a very huge proponent of Gen AI. I've been speaking about it a lot. It's part of. I believe it is it's an inseparable part of the future of communications in a number of ways. That said, my biggest worry is that it hollows out the entry-level skills to the profession, and it encourages shortcuts potentially. To your point that, the ability to construct arguments and reason, get those core skills that you need to make those to have the foundations that you can speak on the spot in impromptu ways. I think that people need to be a lot more mindful. So I think mindfulness is probably the way to kind of face it. But I do appreciate your opinion. And I know, I just wanted to really kind of understand more about where you're thinking. Because I think, and as a way to kind of put a pin in this whole thing, that impromptu speaking, being able to be on the spot and speak extemporaneously, at a meeting, in a cocktail party, even at a funeral, as you had in your book. These are absolutely human things that, nothing, you don't have it until I guess the implants take place in your head, which I hope don't happen. It's a very human thing. And I think we should embrace it and we should love it. And for that, I would encourage every single person who is listening to this show to buy this book, to get on the Think Faster, Talk Smarter train, and the Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast train, as quick as you can, because, it's a way to maintain your humanity, to hyperbolize it a little bit. But I don't think it's an exaggeration. I think it's really important. So, on that note, Matt, do you have any last words before I kind of wrap us out?
Well, thank you for the opportunity just to chat with you. I love speaking with a like-minded individual who really sees the value and benefit of the things that I'm talking about, and has applied them, beautifully. So thank you for that. It all comes down to this. With repetition, reflection, and feedback, we can get better at our communication, especially spontaneous communication. We have to take the time to practice. We have to reflect on what worked and what didn't work. And we have to get input and advice and guidance from trusted others. That's how we get better. I hope that some of the work I do can help people in their journey. I encourage people to check out mattabrahams.com. I have a whole bunch of resources there that are all free. Check out the book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. Listen in to Think Fast, Talk Smart. And if you're on LinkedIn, find me. These are all ways that I hope I can engage with you to help you be a better, more confident communicator.
That's amazing, Matt. And you scooped me a little bit. I was just about to say, go find Matt at mattabrahams.com. Look for him on LinkedIn, and look for, there's some other Matt Abrahams. Make sure you find the guy that's at Stanford. That's the giveaway.
Yes.
And Abrahams_Matt on Twixter, X, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But generally speaking, the website's the best place to go. There's so much there. There's so many resources. Go there. Matt, thank you very much for joining me and for helping me kind of initiate the second phase or the next phase of my show. I really am so grateful to you. So thanks. Please come back again.
Happy to do so. Good luck on everything that's next.
Thanks. Thanks for taking the time to listen in on today's conversation. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe through the podcast player of your choice, share with your friends and colleagues, and leave me a review. 5 stars would be preferred, but it's up to you. Do you have ideas for future guests or you want to be on the show? Let me know at dan@trendingcommunicator.com. Thanks again for listening to the Trending Communicator.